What if I told you that the most important moments in American history are the ones you've never even heard of? That the stories that really define the United States have been collecting dust, left out of the history books? We all know about the Declaration of Independence, the Civil War, and the moon landing. But those are just a few bright stars in a huge, complicated galaxy of events. From a Native American tribe that literally saved the American Revolution to a failed rebellion that accidentally supercharged our democracy, these are the forgotten events that secretly forged the nation. And by the end of this, you're going to see American history in a completely new light. Let's start in the brutal winter of 1777. At Valley Forge, George Washington's Continental Army was on its last legs. Starving, freezing, and riddled with disease, the whole dream of American independence was dying in the snow. But then, help showed up from a source the official story tends to forget. The Oneida Nation, one of the very few Native American tribes that sided with the colonists, marched over 250 miles in the dead of winter to reach the desperate army. They didn't just bring warriors to act as scouts. They carried hundreds of bushels of life-saving white corn. An Oneida woman named Polly Cooper even stayed behind to teach the starving soldiers how to cook it, since it was different from the yellow corn they knew. This single act of solidarity was the lifeline that helped the army survive its darkest hour. The revolution was saved not just by soldiers in uniform, but by allies whose contributions have been almost completely erased from the narrative. While the revolution won freedom for some, it locked others into even tighter bondage. Flash forward to 1811, when Louisiana became the stage for the largest slave revolt in U.S. history, an event so violently crushed that it was almost wiped from memory entirely. Led by an enslaved man named Charles DeLanda, hundreds of enslaved people rose up on the German coast just outside New Orleans. Inspired by the Haitian Revolution, they armed themselves with whatever they could find: cane knives, axes, a few guns, and marched toward the city with shocking military discipline. Their ranks swelled to nearly 500 people. For 2 terrifying days, they burned plantations and fought for their freedom. But the response was swift and absolutely merciless. A mix of local militia and U.S. troops crushed the rebellion. Afterward, dozens of participants were publicly executed. It was a horrifying look at the deep-seated fear of revolt in the South and the brutal lengths the powerful would go to protect the institution of slavery. From a fight for freedom, we pivot to a story that sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it forever changed the public's trust in science. In 1788, the streets of New York City exploded in what's now called the Doctors Riot. For months, rumors had been flying that medical students at Columbia College were robbing graves to get cadavers for dissection. The city's anger boiled over when a student thoughtlessly waved a severed arm at a group of kids, telling one boy it belonged to his recently deceased mother. An enraged mob of thousands formed, descending on the hospital and literally hunting for doctors. The riot tore through the city for days, and when the dust settled, somewhere between 6 and 20 people were dead. The chaos forced lawmakers to pass the country's first laws regulating how bodies could be obtained for medical study, a wild turning point in the professionalization of medicine. What does it take to get the right to vote? Well, in 1842, Rhode Island, the answer was, funnily enough, a failed rebellion. At the time, the state was still using its old colonial charter from 1663, which meant only men who owned a lot of land could vote. With factories popping up, that left a huge chunk of the population, especially poor workers, completely disenfranchised. So a lawyer named Thomas Wilson Dorr led a movement to write a new, more democratic People's Constitution. When the government refused to even look at it, Dorr and his followers just formed their own government. This led to a bizarre, almost bloodless armed standoff between the two rival governments. The rebellion itself kind of fizzled out, and Dorr was thrown in jail for treason. But the whole affair terrified the state's elite. Realizing how much public support the movement had, they quickly adopted a new constitution that dramatically expanded voting rights, proving that sometimes even a losing revolution can win. The story of westward expansion is usually told as this triumphant tale of manifest destiny. But for the indigenous people of California, it was nothing short of a state-sponsored genocide. After the gold rush kicked off in the mid-1800s, California's native population was decimated. Between 1846 and 1873, the number of indigenous people plummeted from around 150,000 to just 30,000. And this was no accident. While disease and starvation were factors, much of this was systematic murder carried out by vigilante groups, state militias, and even the U.S. Army. The California state government spent over $1.7 million, a massive sum for the time, on official campaigns against Native Americans. They passed laws that created a system of Native American slave labor and even prevented them from testifying in court, meaning their attackers could act with total impunity. It's a brutal, chilling chapter that gets left out of the heroic pioneer story. Sometimes the course of history turns on a dime because of pure dumb luck. In September 1862, a Union soldier was walking through a field in Maryland when he spotted an envelope on the ground. Inside were 3 cigars wrapped in a piece of paper. That paper turned out to be Special Order 191, Confederate General Robert E. Lee's entire battle plan for his invasion of the North. This lost dispatch revealed that Lee had split his army into dangerously small, isolated groups. The intel shot up the chain of command to Union General George McClellan. Spurred on by this unbelievable stroke of luck, the famously cautious McClellan finally attacked. The result was the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history. But it was a critical strategic victory for the Union, forcing Lee to retreat and giving President Lincoln the political opening he needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. A few cigars and a lost piece of paper didn't just change a battle, they changed the entire course of the Civil War. In 1882, the United States passed a law that shaped American immigration for the next 60 years. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first law in the nation's history to ban a group of immigrants based entirely on their ethnicity. Fueled by racism and economic panic on the West Coast, the act was meant to protect the country's racial makeup. But this isn't just a story about discrimination. It's a story of incredible resistance. Chinese Americans refused to be passive victims. They fought back hard, filing thousands of lawsuits challenging racist laws. In one of the most successful acts of mass civil disobedience in American history, a powerful movement of non-compliance saw thousands refuse to carry the mandatory identity cards, making the law nearly unenforceable. Their struggle for justice laid the legal groundwork for future civil rights movements, creating a legacy of resistance that's just as important as the act itself. In 1921, a full-blown war was fought on American soil that most of us have never heard about. For 5 days in the hills of West Virginia, 10,000 armed coal miners clashed with a 3,000-man private army of lawmen and strikebreakers. This was the Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest armed labor uprising in U.S. history. The miners, who called themselves the Redneck Army because of the red bandanas they wore, were fighting for the right to unionize and for basic human dignity. The battle was unbelievably fierce, involving machine guns and even private planes that dropped homemade bombs on the miners. The fighting only stopped when the President of the United States sent in the U.S. Army to intervene. The miners lost the battle, but the shocking event drew national attention to the brutal conditions workers faced, becoming a rallying cry in the long fight for labor rights in America. Just a week before the Battle of Blair Mountain, another, different kind of horror unfolded. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, the prosperous African-American community of Greenwood, known across the country as Black Wall Street, was burned to the ground. The Tulsa Race Massacre ignited on May 31, 1921, after a young black man was accused of assaulting a white woman. A white mob, armed by and working with city officials, descended on Greenwood. For 18 hours, they looted and torched homes and businesses across 35 city blocks. As many as 300 black residents were murdered, and thousands more were rounded up into internment camps. For decades, the massacre was deliberately covered up, erased from newspapers, textbooks, and public records. Its rediscovery in recent years has forced a national reckoning with one of the single worst incidents of racial violence in American history. Our final story is about a group of American heroes who were treated like the enemy. In 1932, in the depths of the Great Depression, thousands of World War I veterans marched on Washington, D.C. Calling themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, they were there to demand the early payment of a service bonus they'd been promised, which wasn't due until 1945. Homeless and jobless, they set up peaceful protest camps near the Capitol. But President Herbert Hoover saw them as a revolutionary threat. He ordered the U.S. Army, led by none other than General Douglas MacArthur, to drive them out. Using cavalry, tanks, and tear gas, American soldiers advanced on their own veterans, burning their makeshift camps to the ground. The images of soldiers attacking the nation's former heroes were shocking. The public backlash was a major factor in Hoover's landslide loss in the next election, and the march was a key influence on the passage of the landmark GY Bill in 1944, which transformed post-war America. These are just 10 of the countless stories hidden in the pages of history. If you know of a forgotten event that you think needs a spotlight, share it down in the comments. And if this video changed how you see America's past, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories the textbooks decided to leave out.